basis. And they had a very savvy president at that time, this guy named Ollie Trays, who asked his research department, sales department, to look at some other numbers, and they came back with some cuts that showed, you know, we don't do too well on these households, but when you look at it in terms of these other criteria that a lot of advertisers like, you know, young people, young households with big families that live in A and B counties, we do pretty well. So they went back and they commissioned Nielsen to begin reporting the data based on what we've come to know and love as age, sex, demographics, which was great because it catapulted ABC into a very strong sales position for years to come because they continued to skew and index it. And speaking for Dave Poltrak, who's probably been on a warpath against demos ever since, you know, the problem with that was it was a good fix for the time because there wasn't better data around, better fidelity on who consumer targets were and how to reach them with media, in particular television, but it stuck around and it got baked into our organizational systems, our processing systems, the way we plan, buy, and think about media. So that's kind of my setup that I probably wouldn't have had time for if Dave was here. And I'll try and speak a little bit for him during the panel discussion because he inspired some of my thinking leading up to this. But let me do the intros a little more detail. And actually, what I'll do is I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves and maybe start off with just an opening statement about how they look at how we target consumers, especially through television these days, and what they're trying to do to help fix that. So we'll start with Mark.
Thanks, Joe. Apropos to Joe's opening remarks, we think, and I think the rest of the panelists would agree, that we're at that next stage of evolution after age, sex demographics to find that mythical right audience, which is what tRNA actually stands for. And what we do is that we've got 4 major verticals that we've built a platform, a database-driven marketing platform that allows our customers, who are the buyers and sellers of media, advertisers, agencies, and networks, to actually target those programs and networks based upon the purchase behavior of the people that are watching those programs. So in the CPG category, if you're a Pepsi, you can go after which programs index the highest for heavy swing purchasers of Pepsi. Automotive, you can find those programs that index or rate the highest for people who actually own a SUV for 3 years and therefore are likely to buy a new SUV. We are also in the RX market, pharmaceutical market, so you can actually target those programs based upon the disease state of the people that are watching those programs. And then the last one that I'm probably the most excited about, which is what we call BYOD, bring your own data, is advertisers have their own databases of their own consumers, their own purchasers that we can match to our databases so that they can actually identify which programs index the highest for a particular class of their own purchasers. And the way we do that is matching up set-top box data with actual purchase data from supermarkets, pharmacies, dealerships, et cetera.
John, you started on the buy side for years. You were on the data side at Nielsen, helped put a lot of these data sets together. And now you're back on the agency side with a new proposition. Explain what you're trying to do.
Well, I think what brought me back to this is the same thing that, again, a little history. If you go back, and let's talk about someone who's not here. Back when Nielsen and the entire industry was fighting going to people meters, Dave Poltrak, myself, and a guy named Brian Burns, who was at a syndication company called Orbis, were the only 3 people that actually signed up for AGB. And that was in 85 or 86. And that forced Nielsen to go to people meters. I have had a long belief that we have to have a better way to do it, and I've also been frustrated by the model is broken. The agency model fights it. Advertisers say they want a new thing, but they fight it. And what appealed to me about this particular precision demand is that it was trying to do something new. The 3 of us all deal with the same sorts of data. We all do things that are similar, but we do different things. So we're not really competitive, but what we are all doing is taking it to the next level, which we're going to drag this industry kicking and screaming to it. I mean, I'll give you a point. Chris Garassi this morning said, well, we use age, sex. It's it's a good correlation. Bullshit. It's a bad proxy. What precision demand does, we use set-top box data. We use very deep demographic targeting data. I believe the three of us will save television. What precision demand does differently than what all these guys do, which may or may not work for a given be of interest to a given advertiser, is we actually project out what sales are going to be by product, by retail establishment, however you want to do it, for top-line revenue or margin, and then deliver the media, the television media, to do it, which I find very fascinating because ROI has always been looking backwards. We can now prove that television works. You know, everybody's running to go do digital because, like, the internet's the shiny bubble at the moment, but at the end of the day, you got to make the cash register ring, and we can prove that television is still the most powerful medium by far. And so I view the three of us as like the saviors.
So Dave, you pioneered the concept of behavioral targeting online, and then have brought a new practice to television. It's a little bit different than using sales-based data to target consumers, but explain why you created Simul Media and what you're trying to do with it.
Sure. So Simul Media is a data-targeted advertising network for television. And the business is based on a couple very specific beliefs. One, while most of my team came out of the web and some of us had worked for the last 20 years in online advertising, we believe that the web is coming to TV, TV is not going to the web. Television will continue to be, for a long time, the most powerful and effective communication platform for brand advertisers. However, television has a problem. And the problem is, 12 years ago, the average household in the United States had 28 cable channels available to them, and today it's about 178. And that has led to a massive fragmentation of audiences. And while that has actually enhanced the value of those large blockbuster broadcast network primetime shows, like the Hawaii Five-O's of the world, 80% of the media weight that most of these mass awareness advertisers are having to buy or packaged or ultimately delivered to them are rotators and run-of-network and are delivering, as Chris Megal had mentioned earlier this morning, a massive overfrequency of the heavy TV viewer. And so we think the best way to solve that is to use direct measure data from set-top boxes to find specific audiences wherever they are on television and deliver those for advertisers. And so it's not just about buying the key shows someone wants, it's also about making sure you're buying an extra 20% reach against frequent moviegoers who like romantic comedies and actually have children in the household and turn their set-top boxes off on Friday or Saturday nights for at least 4 hours and likely go out.
Okay, so I guess we're starting off that we're all in agreement that there's got to be a better way to target this medium. I'd like to think if Ali Trays was around today, what he would have used as a better surrogate for targets than age, sex demos. But as you point out, John, there have been attempts over the years. Gray was a big supporter with AGB. Dave Poltrek's been a supporter of all of these things, whether it was AGB or Scan America or various attempts to get at better, more precise target data sets. And over my time covering this business, I've heard people complain about age, sex as a poor surrogate. And I've seen a lot of things being developed, and they've all come and gone. We have some new players, some in the room here today, some on the stage here. What's going to make it different now? Why are we as an industry going to move towards more precision, no plug there, but it's a good word, in terms of targeting people? And why are we finally going to get rid of the age, sex demos?
You know, it's not that anybody was doing anything wrong before. People were using the stuff that was to the best of their capabilities, the best of the technology's capability. You know, the 2 years I spent in that lateral arabesque career-wise at Nielsen, notwithstanding, you know, there are just certain limitations they've got, and there are certain reasons why they will never get well. But we have a technology now, and we as an industry are foolish not to use, I mean, if you build a better mousetrap, use it. You know, rid your house of mice. I think we also have a benefit. I mean, Dave is on the Mount Rushmore of the internet space. We have, I know our people, and I'm sure some of Mark's people, all came out of that online space. I mean, I've got the guy that built Atlas for Microsoft, the guy that built Omniture. All of these guys have that big data experience and that targeting experience and are now saying, hey, wait a minute, I want to work in a medium that actually sells product. And so they're coming into the space so we can avail ourselves of the new technology and the brain muscle that is now available to the TV business that just hasn't been there before. And I think we'd be foolish if we didn't use it.
So actually, just to pick up on where you left off, is it that TV has been so successful and has worked so well, people didn't need to work any harder?
Exactly. I mean, you know, it's like Avis, you know. It's good to be number two. If you're number one, you're fat and happy. You don't have to keep working at it. And I think people have come around to it, and now fat and happy is in a world of hurt.
Okay. Mark?
Although what's interesting, if you go back to 2002 and project out to 2015, television has stayed flat between that $60 and $70 billion band. And there's few industries that over 13 to 15 years in a robust economy, and I know we're coming out of a recession, have actually stayed flat. So I think that the risk that television runs if it doesn't take advantage of these new technologies and big data is that internet will continue to creep up, social will continue to creep up, mobile will continue to creep up, and it will actually take money out of television if you don't take advantage. And so I think what you have is an opportunity by leveraging these big data and the platforms, because it's not just about big data. Big data is the shiny new object, if you will. It's really having the technology platforms to be able to identify where those audiences are. And in terms of the evolution, it really reminds me of that movie many of you may remember called Weekend at Bernie's, in which Bernie was dead. But they found him and they brought him to parties so that they could prop him up. And so Bernie carried around, he had sunglasses on, and he carried around these sunglasses. They carried around sunglasses. He was dead. That's sex-age demographics. Sex-age demographics is effectively Bernie, is that you'll still bring him to the party. He may still show up at the upfront. You'll put him in the corner. But then I think what's going to happen is that buyers and sellers are going to use these new data sources to actually identify where they should be advertising on television and how much they should be paying. Thanks, Bernie.
Sure.
Bernie didn't say anything, by the way.
Well, since these are not prescription, then I borrowed them from Wayne Friedman. They're pretty cool. So I just want to follow up on what both you fellows said, because neither of you really answered my question. But
what did you think would happen?
But what I took away was another insight, which is something I really believe, which is that people in this business like simplicity. They don't like complex things. And the more variables that you give people, the more they're going to gravitate towards simple metrics, simple ways of doing things. And I suspect, and John, you can testify for this, that there's a lot of sophistication that's done on the front end when you're planning who your consumers are as an agency or an advertiser. And that what happens is it kind of gets lost in the shuffle when it comes to actually procuring media, spending money on it, doing guarantees, allocating media buys for brands. And I'm just trying to wonder, is that normal? Is that the way it should go on? Or should we actually try and change? You know what I'm talking about?
Look, that's the way it's always happened. You know, the planners pick fly shit out of pepper with boxing gloves and plan it as best as they can, and then the buyers ignore it and buy whatever CPM they feel is cheap. But one of the things that appealed to me about our process, and I know Dave has a similar type of situation. I honestly don't know on TRA's case. I'm just ignorant about it. But one of the things that got me about Precision Demand is these geeks decided that all of these systems that were out there, the Donovans of the world, the Data Techs, the Stratas of the world weren't. So they spent like a week and they built their own system, which gets rid of that. We can now go from the targeting all the way through the post-analysis seamlessly. I mean, it was a big problem I had at MediaCom, getting the buyers and planners to work together. This is just done by the machine, so it's easy. You know, the machine doesn't care. It's not political.
All right, let me switch gears here, because one of the things I'm seeing is that a lot of the people who are developing enhanced precision targeting metrics are doing it based on one set of behavior, purchasing, right? Which is an important attribute. I think most product brand marketers want to know who's going to buy their products and target them on that basis. But there are all kinds of attributes for figuring out what motivates consumers. And, you know, Dave, I think that's an area where you guys kind of excel. But I would just like, and I know Dave Polchak supports that too. Obviously, he's worked very closely with Simul Media at the same time that he works with a lot of single source data and integrated sales data people. And what I'm trying to wonder is, just like Ali Trey's hit on age sex because it was available at that time, what is really the holy grail? What is the best way to describe what a consumer target is and build a market structure around it? Is it sales data? Is it the contextual data of what people are watching and why they're even in front of a TV set? Or could it be something else that we're not even looking at yet?
Well, yeah, I think I'll jump in on this first. I think there's really two issues, which is what's the perfect data, or what's the best way to abstractly define a target audience such that you want to reach it and you can meet those objectives. And you know, one of the issues that we have right now is that we've had this sort of analog, which is sex, age, demographics, because that is all that was available. I mean, fundamentally, that was all that was available in a 3 or 4 channel network world. Now you can describe it in much, much larger ways. Sometimes it is context exclusively, sometimes it's only sometimes context. It could be purchase. One of the problems we found in the online world was when we built the systems that could target anybody on anything, there wasn't anybody on the other side that knew what they wanted. So I think it actually, at least I think it's two things. I think one, it's a fundamental process, which is one of the biggest problems television has is its reach frequency is absolutely broken. Irwin Efron told us this was coming 12, 14 years ago, and we didn't change practices or procedures to deal with it. So even if we knew who the target was, it doesn't help when virtually every mass awareness advertiser delivers 85 to 90% of their media impressions to 40% of their target. So they're not using that well. But it also doesn't necessarily, you know, it doesn't, a lot of the objectives for mass awareness advertisers is to create awareness among people that have not purchased or might not purchase, and it could be lookalike modeling that look like the purchasers, or it could be people that exhibit certain kinds of behavioral characteristics or modality, not unlike what we heard from the StarCom panelists talking about. I want to reach people at the gas stations when they're down the street. It doesn't matter the content necessarily of it.
I think there's another piece to it too, which, you know, before you get to what's the best way to get at the target, one of the things that has always stuck in my craw is I remember many years ago, a brand manager on Aquafresh looked at me and said, "What should my target be?" And I thought, for God's sakes, I'm a frickin' network TV buyer. You're the brand manager. And so he sort of forced it into something that we would buy, as opposed to who actually brushed their teeth with Aquafresh, or if he wanted to go after the Crest user. One of the things we found, and I know Mark does a lot of work on this too, is there's so much more leverage in the targeting. And I don't think we've had a single client yet who hasn't learned something about his target he had no clue about. It is mind-boggling to me that American business has managed to survive when they really, honest to God, don't know who the hell buys their products. And I think that's something that I know we too, and probably Dave also, are teaching clients that they have to target.
Joe, I want to follow up on the last two questions. One is the simplicity of the buy and the fact that there's this kind of momentum of how people buy and sell. Is 2-3 years ago when we were first getting started, that certainly was the case. But today we've got 45 major brands that are using our system in order to determine where they should be buying. We've got one major advertiser, Mars, that stood up and said that by using our system they got 25% return on investment in one category. We've got some other CPG customers that have doubled down on some networks, zeroed out other networks, bought networks they never bought before, and the networks themselves don't even know why that CPG company did that. We do sell to the networks as well. We've got now 20 different broadcast and cable networks, CBS one of them, that are using it as a sales tool to go to the advertisers to say, advertise on our network. So probably the biggest challenge is that simplicity and working it into the workflow. and we're getting there. To your second question, you used one key phrase as to whether it's purchase data or some other data, and that was what's going to motivate a consumer. Well, motivate a consumer to do what? To make the buy. And everything short of that, I would argue, is a proxy for that purchase behavior. So when you start with the purchase behavior, it is the ultimate answer that you want. Now, sometimes one of our clients is a big retailer, does about $100 million in local advertising. We've matched their proprietary database, which includes not just their own purchasers, but prospects who've called the 800 number who haven't actually made a buy. So they log into our system right now, and they can actually determine both nationally and locally which programs index the highest for prospects. People that have made the phone call to the 800 number but haven't made the buy. And there's that opportunity, as John and Dave have said, to match these digital databases to be able to find the audience that you're trying to advertise to.
So I want to come back to a second point, but I want to start with your first point, because it's something I wonder about as long as I've been covering this business. And a couple of weeks ago, Dave Polchak gave a speech at the ARF, and he had a little briefing afterwards, and there was a marketer in the room. I don't want to mention her name because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but they were trying to explain to me why it was important for the industry to move towards, better, more precise sales-based targeting, right? And from Dave's point of view, it's because it's going to mean that everybody will understand that his dog shows on CBS really have a higher value because they reach more of these consumers, they're more profitable. So I turned to the market, I said, do you really want the rest of the marketplace to know where your most profitable targets are and to jack your prices up because they know that you really need them? The reason I make that point is I've always wondered whether advertisers and agencies knew where their best targets were, but went back to these surrogates of age sex because they could hide where the value was. If
you go back, Bill Claggett used to do that with Ross and Purina. He used to buy off of female heads of cat-owning households and stuff like that. It was a totally made-up number, but he did pretty well with it.
I think, so much of what happens in media is a bit of an echo chamber, and it isn't really even resonating sometimes in the executive suite of the companies. I mean, I recently was with a top 4 retailer in the United States and found out that the advertising business unit inside and the chief media officer was not permitted even internally to have access to the sales marketing data of sales. And there was a big wall in between them, let alone the agency. Now, of course, we know the issues with the agency because you want to be able to fire them in 2.5 years, so you're afraid to actually give them your proprietary data, knowing that if they hire 50 people to work your account, and then when you have to fire them because you want to pay them half as much for the next contract, you don't want them going to your competitor. And I think that that's a lot of what we're seeing here. And it'll be interesting to see, I know Walmart's now subsumed advertising underneath sales. I think a lot of it has to do with so many large mass awareness advertisers have managed media and advertising as a cost center and not a profit center. So they're not entitled to what are seen as the crown jewels of the business. They don't have the expertise to manage a lot of that data. They're not seen as future CEOs of their businesses. I think it's interesting you look at Colgate-Palmolive, Kimberly-Clark just elevated Tony Palmer. We don't have to a COO-ish role. Tell me the last time that happened to a chief marketing officer of a major, Fortune 500 company and consumer marketer in the United States. It doesn't happen.
I can't think of one. Mark, that kind of relates to that third product you were talking about, that you developed this enterprise level product where you're working directly with the client's own marketing data. How open are people about doing that, and how much more of a precision insight does it lead to?
Yeah, there's kind of 2 business models we have. When we license in supermarket data, RX data, automotive data, set-top box data, and do all that matching, we then can make it part of a syndicated solution as part of our platform and sell it to networks and advertisers and agencies. When we work with an advertiser with their own database, it's really proprietary to them. It doesn't become something that's syndicatable, if you will. And the precision, because these folks are using their direct marketing databases. So what they're starting to look at is pulling dollars out of DM, saving the trees, if you will, and applying it to, as John said, the most engaging platform, which is television. We had the chief marketing officer for a division of one of the largest internet e-commerce companies that we've done a direct match to their database, and they can now find out on television what is the best ROI driving programs for particular products that they're launching online. So this is where that is a huge opportunity, is to be able to do much more targeted advertising using a DM approach.
It's interesting that the first uptake our company had was from the direct marketing guys, because they got it. The second big uptake was the insurance companies, because let's face it, those guys are actuarials in everything they do. But to the question about precision, we had not a client, but a retailer that the client sold through has 1,734 stores, and we projected out sales by SKU in each store by week for 13 weeks. And the retailer told us that we were off in 2 stores in 1 week each by 4%. Everything else we were within 1%. That was using the client's data. If we had used syndicated, we would have probably gotten within 20%. That's a huge, huge difference on precision using the client's
So how
data.
do you get clients to do that? I mean,
Well, no client has had a problem giving us the data. They get it. Like when you have, like we call it the war of the nerds. When you have their data guys and our data guys talk, somehow stuff happens. But what's fascinating is everybody's willing to do it because they understand the leverage and the targeting that comes from it. The real issue comes in that a lot of these companies have paid zillions of dollars to collect data that they can't get out of they can't get the shit through the goose. That's our biggest problem in taking in the data, is they just can't get at it because their data structures weren't set up right. But where they can, nobody has an issue giving to it, because as Mark said, we use it just for them. It's not shared with anybody. I mean, my legal bill is ridiculous on the protection of data. So.
All right, so we've been talking about parts of the process, and part of it's planning, strategic planning, understanding who the consumer is, developing a media strategy. Part of it's executing it in the marketplace, buying the media that represents that target, doing deals and guarantees. But there's also other parts of the business, like processing this stuff and getting them into enterprise processing systems at agencies, paying the media. So it's a lot more complex, and when you get into that level of exchange, you know, you probably can't release proprietary information. There have been a lot of deals done in the last few years, especially with cable networks, based on precision or enhanced data. You know, they're usually confidential. There's some stuff that MPG's been doing with some set-top data and Rentrack for Fidelity and CNBC, things like that. They're always one-offs. Is that the way this business will always work, or will it ever get integrated into Media Oceans and Donovans and things like that?
I don't think it's as ugly as it sounds. I think that for a long time, you've seen some degree of secondary promises have been made around deals, and I think actually having spent, you know, the better part of 2 decades in online, that is a really inefficient supply chain. And like I tell people, I mean, in my first company, Real Media, I had more than 100 people in traffic, and my second one, Dakota, was 18, and here we'll never have more than 1 person, maybe 1.5, because TV is extraordinarily efficient in the core ability to deliver things. So I don't think that that's the real challenge. I think being in the Donovan system, being able to communicate some degree of secondary promises and having it pre-vetted by someone that's in research, I have not seen at all be a problem, particularly if you look at the deal size that you tend to have in television, that there's, you know, a lot to go around. I think the real problem that's happening in television that's part of the supply chain is not the processing part. It's the places where there's sort of some fictional disconnects. And the biggest surprise I had coming from online is that when you see what goes into the plan in online, and it tends to be very granular because there's so many, online's a very fragmented business. Typically when you look at a post-buy, post-delivery, you're looking at about 85% of the plan was actually purchased, and then, you know, probably 95% actually delivered. I mean, that's pretty typical. What has shocked me in TV is that I don't know that I've seen a plan executed at more than 15%. And I've realized that the plan is, in most cases, a fiction to be shown to the client. And I mean, I laugh at it. I'm just appalled. It's a fiction that is shown to the client that gets their sign-off, and everybody is this sort of Monday morning don't ask, don't tell about what we actually ran and what we filled it in with. And the most important things that come off the plan that the account person lives for are what are the 2 or 3 shows and the gimmick, the integration gimmick that the client really loved. And they want to make sure to get that so they can tell them Monday morning we got it, and then it's GRPs and price.
Right. So it's all backfill.
It's all backfill. 80% of what comes out in any major plan in media weight is backfill, and it has no connection except a basic sex, age, and GRP and price, which is one of the reasons sex age doesn't go away, because the backfill is increasing as a percentage of media weight as audiences fragment, not decreasing.
John, you want to respond to that, obviously?
No, it just...
You've been there, you know.
Yeah. When I agreed to, when the board talked me into taking this job, I was on the board and ended up loving it so much I said I'd work at it. I explained, David Marins, who a lot of you know, my dear friend who ran research at J. Walter Thompson, got what we do and what these guys do in about 5 seconds. And he said, so you mean to tell me you're doing what you and I used to say we did at big agencies, but we were full of shit?
I'd like to also respond to maybe the first part of your question, which is maybe what's unstated, is that I know for the 3 companies here, we all take, there's one common approach we take, it's a technology approach. And it's not to be trivialized, because the industry has been built on something for 50 years, was anything but a technology platform. And I know when we started the company 4.5 years ago, what we did is put the media researchers together with the database experts and built from the ground up something which we are now using and our clients are now using. So it's a massively parallel processing system with scalability so you can bring in more data. And the last piece is with APIs, application programming interfaces. So we have announced a deal with MediaOcean, the DDS media deal, so that we can integrate right into the DDS MediaOcean platform. We're in advanced conversations with licensing those APIs into a media buying system for major media agencies. So instead of running reports and seeing what the output of those reports are, you put in the parameters and it organically goes right into the buy that an agency does on behalf of the advertiser. So as one CMO said to us, is they want to see a technology solution, not a panel-based solution.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because Mark touched on this and you brought it up about this technology thing. You said it's like it's all this data and it's so hard to do. Well, for God's sakes, the problem with the agency business is everybody tells you why your idea sucks. Nobody says this is, actually there's a germ of something here, let's figure out how to make it better. We all are dealing with these wacko geeks who, I mean, I got one guy that built the part of the Mars rover that would know it was broken on Mars and fix itself. So I go in and I say, we have all this data, it's huge data, and it's technologically so hard, we got to figure out how to talk to MediaOcean. And they're like, no problem, we'll have that, like, we can do that tomorrow. When you need it this afternoon, we'll do that. I mean, these guys don't think what we do is big data. To them, this is like rounding. So.
Yeah, no, I think what I mean, maybe I'm not communicating properly, but what I mean is that human beings, you know, targeting human beings, is pretty complex. They're very multivariant. You can't reduce them to something like age, sex, or even what they bought in a store. And my question is, how do you really account for that when you're trying to plan and influence them through targeting? So we arrived on, like, for years I was at Adweek or Ad Age, and the networks would trumpet the fact that the only thing that matters in the world is adults 18 to 49. And then I'd hear from Dave Polchak, who skewed a little older, say, no, there's a lot of, like, other product categories that do fabulous with 25 to 54-year-olds. And the thing is, you could spin all those cuts every which way, including, I'm sure, a lot of the indices you guys use. My point is, there's no perfect target for anybody, right? So how do you ever make that tradable, you know?
Well, it's going to be tradable because I think there's going to be, we're either going to have we'll have some real basic currencies. And, you know, first, I don't think the Nielsen currency is going away anytime soon. I think we're going to have that basic currency, and there's going to be a basic amount of media weight and how it's, and I think we're going to have certain relatively standardized, but ad hoc standardized or standardized by practice variables that are going to be a little bit deeper, which will look at things like, you know, either old style declared data around intent or awareness or favorability, and we're going to see certain things around purchasers, and like the work that TRA is doing around swing purchasers is great. I think that's with me understood. But what we haven't had yet, and we are going to have, and I think it's going to be a one-off ad hoc thing for quite some time until it changes the industry, is some real awareness, understanding, and then utilization of deeper, more proprietary targeting characteristics at the marketer side that is really going to drive this business. And right now, today, they're not staffed and are not aligned to do it. But it's like online. I mean, I was on the first panel to look at the impression standard in 1994 that Audit Bureau of Circulation, their ABVS group, had. We did not have a standard definition for the impression, the ad impression, the digital ad impression, until I think it was 2008. So I don't think we are going to, and it was already a $35 billion industry. So I don't think we're going to see being held back because there isn't a perfect set of targeting criteria, and they are going to be different for.
I also think, Joe, we do something a little, because of the way we do the arithmetic and we do the fine-tuning, the calibration, we don't talk in terms of just a target. I go to a station or a network, and I know for a given product how many dollars in sales that unit is going to get, or profit, or what have you, whatever metric that client happens to use. And I can go to Lifetime or whoever and say, that spot for this client is worth $1.50. For that client, it's worth $2.75. So it gets away from what's the metric. The metric is, how much does a freaking cash register ring?
And also, our approach is that we wanted to allow the users of our system to define the target any way that they wanted. So we have all these huge databases. On top of it, we have what we call our product Media Analytics, and then hand them the keys. And they can define the target. So one company's definition of a swing purchaser might be different than another. Another one may want to actually target prospects. And so it gives them that blank sheet of paper, and we don't define it for them. We just give them the tools to define it themselves. And I agree with Dave that I believe Nielsen's not going away. And the analogy that I would use is go back 30 years ago to the fixed income market, the bond market. And if you wanted to sell a bond, you needed a rating from S&P or Moody's. And if you wanted to price the bond, it was the credit rating that actually priced the bond. Fast forward to today, how does Wall Street actually price bonds? That you still need your ratings from S&P or now Fitch as well. But it's the market data itself that drives the value of the bond, how much you're going to buy, and those allocations. So I think you project out a few years from now, you don't have to wait 30 years, and you're still going to have your Nielsen ratings, you're still going to have your GRPs, and you're still going to have your currency and your make goods, but it's going to be the data from companies like ours that's actually going to drive the CPMs, the allocations, and the actual decisions on how much you're going to buy.
I hope they stay around for a long time, because what it allows my buyers to do is find the marketplace imbalance based on the schmucks that still use their data. I can now buy it smarter and get an advantage.
What do you really think, Joe?
It's a great counterposition. I think we have time for some questions from the audience. Tony Jarvis.
Hi, Tony Jarvis, Olympic Media Consultancy. First of all, I think those of us that have been around a long time generally embrace everything that three of you are doing and some other companies are doing as well. However, without getting into the fact that you're all using set-top box data, which is not representative of the US and is not viewing, it's tuning, let's put that to one side. Can you survive in that? I believe, and a couple of other people I've talked to here believe, that what you are doing, as much as we love it and embrace it, and if I was Susan Thompson from Chrysler, I'd say, amen, let's go. You threaten the upfront, which I don't think a lot of people want to keep that around. Some of us don't. But if you're threatening the upfront, are you going to stay around?
Well, I want to jump in on the first part, and then I and our company and a number of companies are not only using the direct measure data from set-top boxes. So we take the anonymous viewing data of 30 million Americans, and arguably it is incredibly representative of the US. It's how you balance it with factors. But we've also fused to that the entire Nielsen national panel on a box-by-box level. So if that is believed to be somewhat representative of the United States, we have that, and we have the US Census. So I think that a lot of stories have been put out over the last 10 or 15 years by people trying to slow down set-top box data, and those stories are old and they're not true. I think the upfront is going to continue to be a strong upfront, and it's not about us. The upfront is a futures market. And as long as there is a demand and there is something that's precious and it's scarce and it has a potential to go away, there's going to be a strong market for it. I think what's going to happen, though, to the upfronts is there probably is going to be, I think, more of sort of a data-driven scatter market that's going to develop, and actually is going to give an opportunity to drive higher value in scatter, which is ultimately going to probably drive more pricing in the upfront, not less.
Yeah, Tony, remember, set-top boxes are just one small piece of what we all do. It's just one more input, but it's something that I know for a fact, because I had to correct Mitch Barnes, they were doing their own set-top box data wrong, because they didn't understand how whole home worked technically. But be that as it may, the upfront, the idea with the upfront, as Dave so rightly said, what the 15% of what you plan and buy is actually what you do. The upfront is the primary cause of it. Think of this. I spent how many years and how many zillions of dollars buying media in upfront? And every year I would buy 52 weeks of a show that at the same time Jeff Zucker or Leslie or any of those guys, they had only bought from Hollywood 4 episodes. So going in, 48 weeks were likely to be wrong. So,
And you asked us to project for the whole 52 weeks.
yeah, and thank God you did. Why do you think I always ask for guarantees from the networks?
Yeah, my comment is, Tony, is that I think set-top box data, there are companies like Rentrack that are doing a really good job for long tail and small broadcast networks that don't get ratings at all from Nielsen. And I think what you're hearing here is that it's not a matter of set-top box data. Yeah, you can get ratings in our system, but it's what we do with it beyond that. It's the matching to the other digital data sets. And segueing to the upfront is that our customers, certainly on the advertiser and agency side, are using that data in order to plan for the upfront. So I don't think the upfront goes away. I do agree with Dave. I think it becomes a more robust scatter because then you can use the data in real time. But I think that the upfront stays. And if you think about it, that $60 to $70 billion has the opportunity to increase because it's taking dollars out of places like direct marketing, out of non-accountable media, and bringing dollars in, and so arguably becomes a more robust upfront in future years.
You know, Tony, I go back to, and I don't know if when you were working at MediaCom, if he was a client then, Danny Abraham at Slim Fast, the crazy little Jewish guy that owned Slim Fast and Thompson Medical, one day looked at me in a meeting and said, "So why are you confusing me with that rating shit? If the cash register rings, we'll do more. If it doesn't ring, we'll do something else." At the end of the day, what we're all talking about, in a sense, is get away from this rating nonsense. What matters is, does the cash register ring?
Okay, I think we're out of time, but if I could sum up, that's a good way to end, because I think what we're talking about is, yes, there needs to be a more precise, better way of targeting, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen in the upfront or in the marketplace. You guys are just going to get smarter about informing your clients about how to target better, and you let the marketplace sort itself out. Is that apt? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.